Good evening, Herzliya, Boker Tov in Houston, and greetings to all of our friends of Israel from around the world who are calling in today to begin a celebration. We know out of order, a little bit early, but independence is something that we at the AIFL are going to celebrate really over 3 days over the course of this week, and this is our first opportunity. We're really excited to have everyone here with our special partner. We're coming back, we're visiting at the Yitzhak Rabin Center, and we're going to have a special look at their historical connection to Independence Day and a view of the future of Israel that I think you're all going to really find exciting. Independence Day in Israel is something that is hard to describe until you experience it yourself. So for those of you that are either living in Israel or have visited during Yom Ha'atzmaut, maybe put something in the chat that describes an experience, an impression, something that you remember from that very special celebration that really knows no bounds and really brings forth a great deal of exuberance when you're experiencing it, not only for the first time, but when you're experiencing it every single time. We want to channel some of that this week. We are very proud. We are proud of a country that is in space, is talking to its neighbors, is trying to create new ways of looking at the world in ways that perhaps couldn't even have been imagined, or maybe they were imagined by the founders of the state. Regardless of that, Israel had overcome some tremendous obstacles to get to where we are today, and it still has challenges in front of us, as we know. So who better than to help explore that but one of our board members from America-Israel Friendship League in Israel. I'm pleased to have David Rubin with us. David is no stranger to many aspects of what we have to celebrate in Israel from his own rich personal history and background, as well as his collaborations on the business front as an Israeli businessman in Israel, but also during a stint that he served in the United States as part of the economic mission of Israel to North America. He also earned a master's degree from the Sloan School of Management at MIT, and his involvement in Israeli high-tech and Israeli business community is something that really runs the gambit of different kinds of business opportunities. But he also knows about another side of Israel as chairman of the Rubin Museum Foundation in Tel Aviv. He was our host on a recent tour that we did for the Rubin Museum, and I'll let him introduce and say some words of brachot about this wonderful holiday and being here today.
Thank you, Wayne. First of all, on behalf of the America-Israel Friendship League, good morning and good afternoon to everyone who has joined us. First of all, I would like to wish everyone a Chag Atzmaut Sameach, a happy Independence Day, our 73rd, which is coming up on Thursday. Today, we'll take you on a tour in time, going back to the past, to the days of the creation of the State of Israel, and to its formative years. After 73 years, there are few of us remaining who remember on first hand those years, and therefore it is so important to tell and retell the magical story of how the Israel started and how within a few years it managed to absorb more than the number of its original inhabitants to form and strengthen the foundations of the country in which we are today. Our founding fathers had a unique, somewhat utopian vision for the new Jewish state, hoping to implement the concept of their social and national ideals. In many areas, we have achieved, and as Wayne said, even much more than they had dreamt. However, Israel's current politics leaves us still a lot to be desired, and we all hope for a much better future. Today, you have the unique opportunity to view this historical chapter through the lens of the Yitzhak Rabin Center and its museum. This is very appropriate as Yitzhak Rabin struggled throughout his entire life to establish these goals and was tragically assassinated precisely for his dedication to this cause. So I hope you enjoy this short visit. We look forward to seeing you here in Israel soon. And again, a Chag Atzmaut Sameach to all. And Wayne, back to you.
Thanks so much, David. And I can't go any further before introducing our program. I also have to give a shout out for happy birthday to Laura in Minneapolis. We have viewers today from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Leslie, welcome. Glad you could join us. Myron in Coconut Creek, Florida. Linda in Toronto. Again, people from around the world who are here to experience the Rabin Center in a unique way, learn more about the rich history of the founding of the country, which will be our focus. But we're so lucky today to have the program director of the Rabin Center with us, Udi Katz. Also, this is our second visit with Udi at the Rabin Center. Last time, Udi, we were very focused on the Rabin legacy, understandably. And today we're taking a little bit of a different look at the treasures that are in your center that really focus on the nation and the building of the nation and that narrative that you tell. So can you before we get into some of the specific materials that we want to share, can you talk a little bit about the center's mission as it relates to the country's history and why that is so central to what your educational mission is?
Well, our educational mission in the Rabin Center, and by the way, you can see the Rabin Center behind me in Tel Aviv, in Ramat Aviv, Tel Aviv, is, to be honest, Israel is a successful democratic state. But in the 4th of November 1995, we failed as a society. Our prime minister, our Jewish Israeli elected prime minister, was assassinated by one of our own. And it is our mission that we don't have to agree with Rabin's political way, but we have to agree that the democratic system maybe it's not always working as we hope, but it's the best system we know. We don't want to live in a state like Syria or North Korea. We want to live in a successful democratic state. Therefore, we don't have to agree on everything, but we have to agree of sort of the rules of the game. So this is really, in a sentence, the mission of the Rabin Center.
Well, Israel's been accused of a lot of things, but agreeing on everything, I don't think is one that we have to worry about too much.
Yeah.
Udi, before we go back in history and look at from whence we came and from where the country started, obviously with very humble and challenging circumstances, we're going to show something that the center created that when I first saw it, I was so wowed by it, but it also led to the question, if your educational mission is focused on the history of the building of the country, why create something so celebratory and sort of present day in the video we're about to see?
Well, we think, as I said before, we are a successful democratic society. Although sometimes, if you related to that, or maybe David did, I'm not sure, that we're not happy with how politics are going right now. But when we look back, at the stages of the formation of the State of Israel, and we look at today where Israel is, I think, in our view, Israel is a successful state. And yes, for the 70th anniversary, we created the clip you are soon about to see.
Well, I'm excited in part because I know at the end of the week we're doing a program with the Israel Opera, and it's also I would say not quite as edgy as the one we're about to see, but it involves a hybrid, taking one form of music and allowing, in that case, we're taking Israeli folk songs. This piece that we're about to see decidedly feels like it's for a younger generation of Israelis. And I know that one of the missions of the Rabin Center is to actually bring in soldiers and younger people. When last time I visited, I saw a large group of soldiers that were touring. Was this a conscious decision to sort of reach out to younger demographics in both language and music and sort of manner that may be very different than the founders' generation?
Definitely. By the way, it's our. By the way, you asked about our mission, so I'll talk in money. In the Rabin Center, when you want to come in, you have to pay for the visit. Now, for soldiers or for children or students in the education system, it really costs only a few shekels, because we think this is the most important crowd that comes into our museum, because for the older generation, they know the history, they've been there. They are excited when they come to the museum. They are important crowd as well. But when we talk about soldiers or students, they don't know Yitzhak Rabin. When they were born, he was already gone, sadly. So yes, we have to learn from the past in order to have a better future.
All right, so everybody buckle your seatbelts. Live via streaming, we share from Tel Aviv and Udi's computer at the moment, if all goes well. A vision of today in Israel, very much informed by the past. So Udi, I leave it to you to go ahead and crank that up for us.
Yeah, so I'll just play the video.
סתיו גלותי. הם שוכבים בין העצים, צעירים, בוערים, חולמים על עתיד אחר. יש להם רעיון שמבעיר את הנשמה על מקום אמיתי, ליהודי חדש, לא רדוף וחלש. עובד אדמה, שרירי, מסוכס, מגן על עצמו, חי חיי שוויון במשותף. הם ממציאים מחדש את ציון, ולציון הם אכן יוצאים. חוצים את המדבר, עוברים ים גדול, הופכים את החיים בעקבות רעיון, או יותר הזיה על גבול השיגעון. היכולתם להעלות על דעתכם שאביכם יהיה לפועל? אני עתה כתינוק שנולד, נולדתי מחדש. מתוך הכלום רוצים לפרוח, חופרים אמת של בריאה, לא מבינים בחקלאות, איך ניגשים לאדמה. הם צריכים ללמוד מאפס, אז הם מאלתרים וממציאים, מתייעצים, מרכיבים, מתאימים גידולים. כשהנשמה מהירה, גם שמיים אותי ערפל מפיקים אור נעים. עבודה קשה סיזיפית, רעב, מחסור וחולי, השפה דוקרת, הגעגועים שורפים, את רגעי הייאוש ממלאת, אמונה ציונית יוקדת, האש בלילות מחוללת מעגלים. רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה. רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
דונם ועוד דונם, רוח החלום הופכת חומר, הקיבוץ, המושב, עיר עברית ראשונה מאהבתנו. ובפח מקום, ופתאום ביום בהיר נהייתה למדינה, מוציאים מדינה, הנס מתרחש, מה הם גבולותיה? איש לא ידע. הערבים טוען הזקן מתנגדים לחלוקה, אז למה להכניס מדינה לתוך קופסה? כך נוסדה לה רשמית בעיית הגבולות, הערעור התמידי על כל המוסכמות, קרקע פוריה ליצירה והמצאות, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה. פחד, תמיד קצת פחד. כל פינה בעולם יש לה 3,000 השנים שלה, אולם תולדות ארץ ישראל מחוברות חיבור אחר בתולדות האנושות. כה אמר ינוש קורצ'אק כשביקר פה, ואחר כך הלך עם גוזלה ואלה שם השריפות. הטראומה שלנו, חרדה קיומית, מרגישים שרק פה אנחנו מוגנים. הילדים הולכים לצבא ואנחנו אומרים להם שלום, בוכים כשהאוטובוס באופק נבלע, אמהות בדאגה, רק שלא יהיה קר ורק שלא תהיה בדלת דפיקה. צליל אופנוע מקפיץ זיכרונות, כתום וכחול מסמין צבע אדום. השקט זמני, צריך להספיק ומהר לפני שיגמר משהו תמיד ברקע בוער. רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה.
אנחנו במפה ואנחנו נשארים במפה, לא רק בספורט, לא הכל.
לקיחת סיכונים, מורשת של אבות, לחשוב בגדול, להצביע בענק, רעיון הופך להיות, אם נרצה מספיק חזק, אין דבר כזה קשה, זאת אומרת אפשר. הזרעים של ההייטק כבר בסבט, תסבוקים במגדלים של השכלה ומשכים ביטחוניים, הצלחות כל כך גדולות, מדינה כל כך קרה, הישגים חסרי תקדים, העולם מביט בתדהמה. רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה. עולים, 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 עולים. חברה מתגוונת, קשת של צבעים, כבר לא הישרדות, חיים את החיים. ימין, שמאל, דתיים, חילונים, מזרחים, אשכנזים, ערבים, אתיופים, רוסים, ישנים וחדשים. כור היתוך שמייצר שריפות וחתכים, סדקים של ייאוש בתוכנו נפערים. האמת אינה תלויה בכוח, והצדק אינו צמוד לרוב. האמת אינה תלויה בכוח, והצדק אינו צמוד לרוב. מחפשים זהות שנעלמה עם השנים, כבר לא רוצים לבטל היסטוריה, תרבות וערכים. אנחנו לא יחד סביב המדורה, והאש מייצרת הפרדה מחלה.
ואתם תיבחנו ביכולת שלכם להמשיך את אשר נדרש להמשיך ולשנות את מה שצריך לשנות.
יותר ויותר אנשים וקבוצות פועלים יום-יום במרחב הישראלי. ממציאים, מחדשים ומחברים. קבוצות ומגזרים, מרכז ושוליים, חולמים את הצעד הבא של המדינה. זהות משותפת, ישראלית, שלם, שמכיל בסובלנות את כל חלקיו.
רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית בוערת בחזה, רוח לחומר, מחשבה למעשה, אש ישראלית שנה, שאין אפילו לא פסיק בהיסטוריה האנושית, קרה פה נס. רוח שערה הפכה לחומר פועם, ליצירה אנושית. אז לקראת 70 השנים הבאות יחד, חשוב שנזכור שלחלום בגדול, ואז לעשות שינויים אמיתיים בעצמנו ובעולם, זה הכי ישראלי שיש. זו אותה האש, אותה אש שגורמת לנו להרגיש ערבים לכל מה שקורה במקום הזה, שמחובר אלינו באהבה, מלב השורשים.
Wow. So before we jump into our tour, and I want to give people the opportunity to just go to the chat and just one or two words of how you're feeling now. What comes to mind as you were watching that? I realize, particularly for non-Hebrew speakers, there's a lot to capture. Just to follow it, but certainly a great deal of history, emotional, inspired, in awe, pride. Pride keeps coming up. Motivational, exhilaration and pride. Awesome, feeling pride. Hope for the future. Fantastic. Wow, want to see the film again. Fantastic pride. Kol hakavod. I'll stop there. Beautiful, very emotional. Our friend Jean said both tears and joy. So there's a tremendous amount of emotion attached to these reactions. This isn't just history. And that part of your mission, Lynn pointed out the Hamilton parlance, which I also sort of enjoyed as well. A modern miracle, survival, missing Israel. A lot of us, Udi, living outside of Israel are missing Israel during the quarantine. And even just seeing and hearing from our Israeli friends, yourself included, over this past year has meant a great deal to us, to remind us of that friendship. So take us back now to the humble origins. How did we get here? The line I loved in the film toward the end, dreaming big is maybe one of the most Israeli things you can imagine. So tell us about those big dreams before there was a state, before this was, a certainty at all, and it was a much more speculative dream.
Yes. Okay, yeah, I also thought of this line of dreaming big, and now I will share screen the tour. The museum is it's a different experience. Of course, all of you watching us are more than welcome when you will be able to, and you visit Israel, to visit our Israeli museum at the Rabin Center. I will begin just with a sentence. The Israeli Museum in the Rabin Center tells us two parallel stories. One, the biography of Yitzhak Rabin, and parallel to that is a story of the Israeli society and about dreaming big. Well, his parents dreamt big, meaning Yitzhak Rabin's parents, both Jewish Zionists from Central and Eastern Europe, who came to Israel and met here and created a family. And Yitzhak Rabin is born to that family, a son of a son of them. And he was already, when he was born, he knows how to speak Hebrew, he knows how to work the land, and how to hold a rifle. And this is a big dream, the vision of the Zionist movement, of the Jew returning to his homeland, and has the ability to affect his life and to affect his society's life. And this can only happen in a Jewish and a democratic state. Why? Of course, because as a Jewish state, a state of our own, and only in a democracy, I, the individual, can affect my life. So that's about Yitzhak Rabin. And today, of course, Israel is a fact. But only 100 years ago, it was only a dream. And looking back in the 20s and the 30s of the former century, and by the way, you can see here Yitzhak Rabin joining the Palmach Brigade when he was young. During this time, of course, the British controlled here the land, and it is written in the beginning of the room, which it is an exhibition of the Israeli society. Here we have to say still the Jewish society in the Israeli land. It's written here, the road to independence. Now, why is it written the road to independence? Because as I say to sometimes students or soldiers, the state wasn't just born in a day when the British left. The state was created and established during this time of the 20s and the 30s while the British control. And you can see here in the museum Jaffa on the one hand, on the other hand, the beach of Tel Aviv, very similar today. Tel Aviv, already a modern city in the 20s and the 30s. By the way, on the floor, we have a timeline. Why a timeline? A global timeline? Because we are always affected by things happening in the international world, for example, Corona. And going back to Tel Aviv, you can see here more pictures of Tel Aviv. Again, a very modern city. The port of Tel Aviv. The port of Tel Aviv, today a place for leisure, but at the time a real port. To build and to be built, you will soon see fort and stockade. And going back to the 20s and the 30s, as I said before, the Jewish society is actually creating the base for the state to be. We have, of course, by the Palmach and the Agana, a fighting force, but also we create, went back too much. We create also a society, a democratic society, meaning we elect and get elected. Ben Gurion, and sometimes people forget that, is an elected leader. It's true. Ben Gurion, in our history, in the Israeli history, is not the most democratic person or leader I know. But, and this is a big but, he is an elected leader. Now, just a week ago, it was the Holocaust. The Holocaust, as we call it in Israel, Yom HaShoah. Well, I'll just go back. I just want you to see this picture. Okay. It was Yom HaShoah, the day we commemorate the Holocaust in Israel. Now, you don't see it in the picture well, but you will have to believe me or come to the museum. You see here a Hebrew soldier in the British Army. How do we know he's a Hebrew soldier? Because it is written in the shell, on the shell he's carrying, Shai LeHitler. I'll translate it, a souvenir to Hitler. The Jewish society joins the British Army, although we are fighting the British because they don't allow at the time Jewish immigration to the state of Israel, 1937, 1938, 1939. But of course, the Nazis, our greatest enemy, we joined the British, and look at the figures. 27,000 Jews of the Jewish society joined the British Army. Now, the numbers, the Jewish society at the time, only around 400,000 people. Around 8% of the population joins the British Army. Now, if you look today at Israeli numbers, it's like today 800,000 would join the British Army. And by the way, when we look, how did we win the independence war that we will soon encounter, it's also not only because of that, because we got much more professional, looking from an army's point of view. And another issue is a gender issue. Now, as you know, today, Israel is a democratic society. We are a society that believes in equality between men and women. From the 27,000 people who joined the British Army, 4,000 were women. Now, today, it seems very, okay, it's regular. But when you look back in the 20s and the 30s, it's quite rare that young women joined a foreign army and they were not obliged to do it. It wasn't a mandatory law for Jews to join the army. And regarding democracy, I will take you to, we have in the museum this sort of polls that are about disputes in the Israeli society. Now, this is a dispute over the partition plan. Well, we know we are still arguing today in the Israeli society, what are the borders or what should be the borders of Israel? It's an ongoing question, but it's a democratic debate. Now, in the 30s, it is also a democratic debate. The issue here is, in my point of view right now, it's not the debate itself, okay? It doesn't really matter right now what is the right answer. Or what should be the right answer. It was a debate. Now, it was a democratic debate. Now, when I say it was a democratic debate, what do I mean? I mean that we had in the Jewish society in Israel already newspapers, and some writers say we should accept the partition plan in 1937. Some writers say we shouldn't accept the partition plan from all kinds of different reasons. Now, how do we decide in 1937? Well, we have the Zionist Congress, and the Zionist Congress is based on elected leaders. Democracy didn't just happen in 1948. The Jewish society, although it didn't have a state, we didn't have a state of our own, we created a democratic society. Now, regarding women had the chance to elect and get elected. Now, today, when I say it to students, well, of course, what do you mean? Both my parents go to elect, my father and my mother. What's so weird about it? Or what's so strange about it? Well, in the 1920s, the 1930s, in most places in the world, women did not go to elect and were not elected. But here, in the Jewish society, it happens. It happens already in 1937. By the way, at the end of the day, we decide to accept the partition plan already in 1937, although most of the Jewish society isn't very happy about all the details in it, but we decide to accept the plan after a democratic vote in the Zionist Congress. It does not come to reality because at the time the Arab side said no, and of course 1939, World War II, well, you know the rest. We will continue. Of course, my time right here is quite short, and we are concentrating on a few things in the museum. You will not be able to see everything in the museum. Sorry about that, but of course, as I said, we will be more than happy to accept you once it will be possible. And here we see the British leave the land. The British left after, of course, the partition plan of the UN. And you can see here David Ben-Gurion, as you saw in the clip we saw, we hereby declare the establishment of the State of Israel. Now you see here the map, and you see the blue zone. This is not the partition plan, although it's a bit like it, but it's not a partition plan. This is the map of reality. What do I mean by that? The day the British left, the blue zone is a zone that the Jewish society is controlling when the British are leaving. Now, when you look at the map, you have to ask, how did Israel win the war? And you can see the map, it's quite bad from the Israeli point of view. Most of the Galilee is not in Israeli control. The road to Jerusalem is closed. Jerusalem is under siege. The Negev, the south part of Israel, is not in our control. And so how did we win? In the picture here, we see David Ben-Gurion, and next to, on the side, we see Moshe Sharet, a few people on the sides. Now, Moshe Sharet was sort of the foreign minister. And by the way, we are here under sort of the wings of the AIFL. And Moshe Sharet is returning from the US, from the Truman administration. And by the way, Truman was a friend to Israel. And the Truman administration is saying to Moshe Sharet, if you guys, if you Jews declare a state of your own when the British leave, you are on your own, and we think you will not survive the war. Now, why do the Americans think like that? Well, they see the same map we see right now. It's a logic thought. By the way, it's not because they hated us or loved us. They thought, well, you don't have a chance. Now, Moshe Sharet is coming to Ben-Gurion and saying to him, I think we will not, I agree with the Americans. I want a state right now, but I'm afraid we will not succeed. David Ben-Gurion is saying, I think we will. And after a night when they talk together, Moshe Sharet, the next day, is saying to the government, well, we must take a big chance, but I agree with my friend David Ben-Gurion. This is a one-time opportunity, and we have to take the chance. There is a vote in the sort of government of Israel, again, still not a state, and we decide that we must seize the day, and again, dreaming big. David Ben-Gurion definitely dreamt big, and looking back, he was right. At the end of the day, we win. We win what we call in Israel the independence war. Now, when military historians look back, how did we win the war? Yes, we were much better organized than the other side. We were a democratic society. We were an organized society. Ben-Gurion, maybe some people thought they were from not his political party, but most people agreed that this is our political leader. That means what is democracy. It was still not the military, but sort of the military militias, or later on the IDF, did what Ben-Gurion said, because it's very clear in a democratic state that the army does what the government tells it to do. So, as you see, and the other side didn't have that. The other side didn't have bus companies to bring soldiers from point A to point B. The other side didn't have Kupot Cholim. By the way, because of Kupot Cholim, we are also succeeding today with the Corona issue. Kupot Cholim, by the way, sort of our, I don't know how best to translate it, our health organizations. In Israel, this is why we are also so succeeding in the Corona vaccinations. And it began in the 20s and the 30s of the former century. And of course, well, there are people who made their PhDs, how did we win the war? But I really just said it very generally. But again, as I said before, the main reason we're much better organized than the other side. We have an intelligence branch the other side doesn't have, and we work together. So we dreamt big, but we worked hard to make that dream come true. Again, relating to the clip, we are continuing. We have here our Declaration of Independence. And by the way, men and women, 2 women signed the Declaration of Independence. I think one of you may know, Golda Meir. Now, 2 women signed the Declaration of Independence, and there were not just 2 women who were brought to say, hey, we got women who will sign it. One of them was a major political figure, Golda Meir, 20 years later, Prime Minister of Israel. Okay, this is a good example of that. And continuing in the museum, we are jumping in time, and we got to the 50s. And you can see here
the line that's stuck in my head from the clip, Olim, Olim, Olim.
Yes, exactly. Now, you know something, I guess I know not all, but most of the audience is American, and of course the AIFL. Well, imagine President Biden today saying to the American people, dear American people, to my best knowledge, around the American population is around 300 million people. Imagine President Biden saying today, well, dear American people, in the next 10 years, we need to absorb around 500 million immigrants. Now, how would that go? Probably not well. Now, in 1948, the Jewish population in Israel around 650,000, around. The Arabs who stayed here, who become citizens of Israel, around 150,000. This population absorbs more than a million people in only 10 years. The population is tripling itself in 10 years. Now, it's unthinkable. Now, the state, it's not Israel as you know today. The state was in poor condition. You can see here, the picture you are seeing is a picture of Pardes Chana. Today, a known town in Israel, I know in most places it's not known, and of course that's okay. It's not a big city, but a known town in Israel, and you can see the laundry on the tent. Why? Because this is the ma'abarot. Now, when you translate ma'abarot to English, if I'll do it in Google Translate, it will say transition camps. Now, it makes sense, you come to a state, was just established, a large number of immigrants. Of course, okay, transition camps, makes sense. Now, people lived in those transition camps for 4 years and 5 years. Life was very difficult. By the way, most of the Israeli population, is Israel, is actually, it's their grandparents who came here in the end of the 40s, in the beginning of the 50s. This is the most Israeli population today. And you can see here the tents in Pardes Chana. It's written here, a state under siege. The security issue was very difficult in the 50s. The state was just established. And you can see here also, this is Jerusalem. This is a Talpiot neighborhood in Jerusalem. Now, it's either tin shacks or some kind of other shacks, and without running water and without electricity. Now, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, I had a student in the museum who said to one of our instructors, hey, what do you mean no electricity? I can see the electricity here. Now, you had electricity for sort of a main building or a main shack, but for people who lived in the shacks, they had no electricity and no running water. Now, this is Jerusalem. In the summer, it's terribly hot. In the winter, it sometimes snows. Now, I had a visitor in the museum who said, I lived here for 4.5 years without running water, without electricity, and life was very difficult. We call it in Israel, תקופת הצנע, sort of the modest era. What do we mean the modest era? The state did not have enough money to buy wheat for its citizens. Now, by the way, in the clip, I don't know if maybe you missed it, we had Ben Gurion's rice, ptitim, a known Israeli pasta. Why do we have an Israeli pasta, sort of Israeli pasta type? Because the state did not have enough money to buy rice. So Ben Gurion comes to one of the founders of Osem, a known factory for food, and say, well, help us. And they're creating a pasta which is known Ben-Gurion's pasta. Almost every child in Israel knows what is ptitim. This is sort of an Israeli pasta. And going back to the 50s, life was very difficult. And we have we're having a lot of issues. And you can see here, here's the dilemma flag. Newcomers versus veterans. Most of the veterans were from Ashkenazi descent, meaning Jews who coming from Europe, and a large number of the newcomers are from what we call Mizrahi or Sephardi descent, coming from Middle East or North Africa, and we have a lot of issues. At the time, the notion was, and it wasn't from a point that we want to make life difficult from the newcomers. The notion was a melting pot, meaning we will bring here Jews from all around the world and we will create a new Israeli. By the way, my grandparent, he was forced to change his last name. Why? Because you must have an Israeli name. Today, we are in a different phase, okay? If newcomers are coming to Israel, of course, you are allowed to keep your last name or your first name. You are allowed to hear the music you like, etc. And at the time in Israel, by the way, for example, Mizrahi and Sephardic descent, it was a big issue. It is still an issue in Israeli society today, but, and this is a big but, 25% of the population today, we have intermarriage. For example, I am from Ashkenazi descent. My wife is from sort of Mizrahi, her parents came from North Africa, from Libya, and we have children. So what is their descent? Mixed. Now this is not rare. This is what is so important. It's not rare at all. I know a lot of people when one side is from this descent and the other side is from that descent. In Israel, in the Israeli society today, it is not rare to see couples like that. In the 50s, yes, it was rare. It is still an issue in Israeli society today. Yes, I'm not trying to cover up the dilemmas and issues that we have today, but yes, let's say, I think, to my best knowledge, with these numbers, in 30, 40 years, it will disappear. It will not be an issue. It will be an issue of the past. So this is the 50s. And of course, during the 50s, we are also creating the Weizmann Institute. In the clip, we had Ada Yonat, the Nobel Prize winner. The Weizmann Institute was created in the 50s. We are stepping out of the financial crisis. We are absorbing the large number of immigrants. We have here in the museum, what we call in Hebrew, Hamovil Ha'artzi. I don't know how best to translate it, but sort of the pipe getting water from the Kinneret in the north to the south, to the Negev. Again, something dreaming big. And we have here samples of buildings created. The new pioneers, meaning the new pioneers in the Negev, in the Galilee, in the 50s and in the 60s. And yes, in the 60s, we are getting to the point where we can also breathe a bit. We passed the big financial crisis and we move on. And now I will have to make a very, very big jump to the 90s because, again, apologizing, but my time is very, very short, and getting to the point, jumping to the early 90s, Yitzhak Rabin winning the elections. Now, of course, I skipped the 6 Days War, and the Black Panthers in Israel, and the Yom Kippur War, and the peace with Egypt, the first peace with an Arab state, with Egypt. And getting to the 90s, I want to show you something. And it's and it relates to the clip you saw. Yitzhak Rabin, in the first speech, when he's addressing the Knesset, the Parliament of Israel, He's saying the national security of Israel. And this is Mr. Security saying, a reminder, Yitzhak Rabin, the successful chief of staff of 6 Days War, etc. In Israel, he's known as Mr. Security. He's saying that the national security of Israel is not only the tank, the submarine, or the fighter jet. It is also the teacher in the school, the new immigrant who came from Leningrad. This is, of course, at the time of the former USSR, as a doctor in the hospital, and you can see the big change in the numbers. The budget for internal affairs are doubling in 3 years, and we get to where we are today. And by the way, you saw in the clip a lot of the issues of the high-tech nation. It's a lot because of large money flowing in Israel in the early 90s. Now, why does it happen? Well, one of the reasons, of course, it's very complicated, is the Arab boycott actually collapses. Intel, for example, is opening a big factory in Kiryat Gat during Rabin's time. Why? Because the Arab boycott actually collapsed. A lot of international companies are coming to Israel. Why did the Arab boycott actually collapse? Yes, because of the peace with Jordan, because of the peace accords with the Palestinians. Who are we, Saudi Arabia, for example, to say to Intel, don't open a big factory in Kiryat Gat if the Israelis are making peace with the Palestinians? And for example, Intel today, to my best knowledge, is the biggest company, high-tech company in Israel. And of course, the IRS in Israel, income tax, Intel is paying big salaries for its engineers, and the government of Israel, of course, is making profit of that. And this is what enables the big priority change, which Rabin is talking about. And by the way, Yitzhak Rabin didn't cut the budget for security. He's just making internal affairs much more higher. That's about that. Yitzhak Rabin, I will just say a few words about the Oslo Accords. Yitzhak Rabin is here signing, of course, we have the peace with Jordan, which of course is in with Israeli consensus. I would say only that Yitzhak Rabin shaking hands with Arafat. He didn't like Arafat personally, but in his view, this was for the best interest of Israel. As you can see here at the museum, the Oslo Accords, the peace process with the Palestinians, are disputed accords in Israel. We are still debating about it today. We are a democratic society. As I said in the beginning, we don't have to agree with each other. We do have to agree on the rules of the game. Sadly, as you probably know, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated during the time of the Oslo Accords by an extremist Israeli Jew. Of course, almost all people in the Israeli society, whether they agreed with Rabin's political way or disagreed with Rabin's political way, agree that we shouldn't assassinate our prime minister. We can agree with him, we can disagree with him, we can call for his resignation or support him. I will stop with that sentence. And I hope you had a short and meaningful tour. And
Udi, if we were with you, and we look forward to being with you in person for this tour, you would have to literally be running through the facility to cover as much ground as you did on our virtual tour today. So we appreciate, you're going to have to get in really good shape by the time we come in mass. And we do know that the flights are starting to return,
yeah.
and we're grateful to already hear some stories from people about, particularly who have relatives there and have been able to reunite after more than a year of not being able to see their relatives. But before we sign off and talk about the rest of the celebrations from this week, everyone, the reactions to the celebratory video are just really phenomenal. And everyone is curious, who is the singer? Is there anything you can tell us about the performer and the singer? And
yeah,
this feels like a discovery.
Yeah, I should have organized it before, to be honest. By the way, you can see the film on YouTube.
Great.
You can find it on YouTube. It's in YouTube.
We'll be sharing a video to everyone on this call. It'll be very easy for you. You don't have to search. We promise we'll send that out so you can watch it again. And then we'll send the link, obviously, on the YouTube video. But tell us about who is this remarkable?
He's a known singer. He's a known actor and a singer, Tzachi Alevi. And as you said, Yitzhak Rabin organized everything, the film. And so he's known to Israelis. He's not known for abroad. He's not a very known singer, though, but he's known. So
that really was a special treat, and who knows, maybe this does become Israel's Hamilton for at least getting the word out to the part of the excitement of this country, the big dreaming, the embrace of people from throughout the world, the against the all odds creation of Startup Nation, and as you said, with all of the security threats and challenges and Mr. Security, always considering that a priority, a recognition that to become the dream of the founders of the state, Israel would have to be more than a defensive, more than the IDF. The IDF was necessary, but insufficient to build the kind of country that the dreamers of the farmers and the dreamers of the scientists and the dreamers of the poets and the dreamers for millennia have prayed for and worked for. And so really, you've done a great service with both the tribute as well as cataloging the history in such an accessible way to help frame it for us, that we're grateful again for this opportunity. And we're greatly looking forward to seeing you and doing this in person in the coming weeks and months. I do want to remind everyone, this is the beginning of the week, obviously Yom HaZikaron in front of us, before the big celebrations of Yom HaAtzmaut. On this Wednesday, our normal regular program date, please don't log on to our program at noon, because we will be pushing our regular program because of our colleagues in Israel celebrating with their families. We will push our celebration to Thursday, this Thursday at noon Eastern time, with an amazing program of the Israel Opera that I referred to earlier. It was a big hit last year, and when we've done this before, so we hope you'll tune in, and this will help put you in the right spirit. And for those of you that just can't wait, our friends and partners at the Israel Embassy in Washington, D.C. are doing a program that will be accessible late in the evening in the United States and other parts of the world. So if you're up 8 p.m. in Eastern time on Wednesday, you can join us for that as well. They're making their streaming available to everyone. Please send us an email if you haven't already seen the link for that. And we're happy to share that with you if you want to join us in the evening. So here we are, once again, celebrating, and once again, recognizing that the road ahead still has many challenges. Always easier to do that when you have friends around us. And so I just want to acknowledge one little story that I saw in the chat from Cindy, who mentioned that she has a new granddaughter. Her daughter lives in Israel, was born, I guess, last week. So Mazel Tov. She was born on Yom HaShoah, And I guess that had particular historical resonance as well, because her parents were both survivors who then came to Israel. So we love hearing these stories. We love sharing these stories. We love bringing friends of Israel together from around the world. And we wish everyone, our friends in Israel, a wonderful week of meaningful commemoration and celebration together. We will be with you in person when we can, and for now, we're with you in spirit. Everyone have a safe and joyous and celebratory week.